All right, we are live. Here we go. What's up, Fred? How's it going, man?
Good Monday morning to
Good
you.
morning. Good morning. Not as big of a morning as we had yesterday morning.
Yeah, I think getting up at 6 a.m. in the morning in general to drive anywhere is a novel experience, but kind of amazing to do that on Hollywood Boulevard and to show up to like a big crowd of people
Oh yeah.
lined up to see a movie. And it's obviously so much of the excitement of this like Barbenheimer phenomenon is people in Hollywood and in the consumer world just excited that movies are kind of a big deal. And I think the just that feeling was definitely real. And as somebody who feels like a New Yorker that moved to LA, I still think it's pretty cool to show up at the Chinese theater and kind of see all the handprints and all the Hollywood lore. Apparently, my friend says that building is haunted. That maybe like Marilyn Monroe and James Dean are sitting next to you while you're watching.
Okay, I'm down. I'm open to it. I mean, when was the last time you saw people dressing up for a film?
Well,
I can't think of that.
for
Star
Oppenheimer
Wars?
or for Barbie.
Well,
I guess
no, this is as we were leaving, because I came late. As we were leaving, I saw people who were dressed up as Oppenheimer, and of course, people are obviously dressing up for Barbie left and right.
I didn't see
But
what's the Oppenheimer outfit?
it's just a
like
suit and a hat, suit and a hat.
Pretty awesome.
But like the last time feel like I saw that when I went to a movie theater was Star Wars, right?
I gotta believe that just the garden variety comic book movies that come out have some initial wave of dress ups, but it is weird to think of it for Oppenheimer. But I guess my sort of when I hear about the way just circles of friends are reacting to both movies, it sort of reminds me of the Crazy Rich Asians kind of moment where it really felt like a movie that part of the effect of the movie was how excited people were to be at the movies watching it.
Right.
And also I think I remember Magic Mike kind of had that effect when it came out. It was mostly like
funny.
Like bachelorette party vibes. Like I went to see that movie because I thought Steven Soderbergh was like, wow, it's so cool to see him do this movie. And then I'm like, wow, I really showed up to a different party.
It's cool. It's cool to see. I guess a credit to their marketing, or maybe the zeitgeist, or people want a film of this nature or an experience of this nature. They've been craving it. Summer, the winter's over. Finally, there's something to look forward to, and here's an event, and I can dress. I mean, I heard about people having Barbie parties. People are decorating their homes with Barbie, having Barbie potlucks, and I don't think anybody's doing that with Oppenheimer, but
I mean, not to go too down this because everybody's mostly reporting on how like this is brands and the way that they're entering them. Right. I mean, there's so much there. I mean, the real question is, are there comparable brands that can be as sort of like instantly like light switch like success? And I look, kudos to the producers that they made some really sharp choices with Greta Gerwig. She's not your kind of garden variety like Hollywood phone it in and make it big and loud. Like she's a really thoughtful filmmaker.
Right.
And
thoughtful film.
And Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling are proper actors that sort of clearly choose roles in interesting ways. So I think like
also living legends.
They did a cool thing, which is like they took an opportunity and did something interesting with it. Is that hopefully the trend? That'd be awesome to think that sort of the same type of kind of like handmade, make it special approach that has occupied a lot of premium television and sort of films once upon a time in the avant-garde. Is that what brands can do? Or do they all just go back to the usual control every moment of it, make it a commercial? Or is it also like lightning a bottle? Like sometimes great things happen that are hard to replicate, So I'm very curious how on that like this is the entry for brands to start making films in the way that this did do something special. Does that repeat?
I am waiting for the blockbuster film Trader Joe, Find the Best Snack. That's the film, billion-dollar film I'm waiting for, bro.
I will say that
it's funny because
there was a media company I want to start, it's the Trader Joe Media Company.
The Trader Joe multimedia conglomerate.
Because I think what they've done to the consumer shopping grocery experience is special.
Totally.
And actually runs in the face of most other instincts. Like you don't need that many types.
I don't even want.
Here's two types of butter. Just buy these two types of butter. You don't need 50 different types of butter.
I don't even want, that. I want a multimedia company that just turns any potential brand into a sequel. Like Chick-fil-A, the perfect chicken. Like that's a film. Like if anything, to me, Barbie is like it's like Nolan brings people, right? And it's gonna Nolan is gonna bring Nolan fans and their friends to the movie theater.
It is
And then
interesting though,
and
like
then
did
Barbie
Nolan,
kind of brought Oppenheimer as well, I feel like, along for its ride. But Barbie is this example of, hey, this is not a sequel. It's not a new brand either, but it is leveraging. So it's like, hey, is Hollywood discovering a new, path, which is not an old, it's like, the founder. There's plenty of films about companies that exist that we know about. But, I mean, it's like, is this now a way for people to turn existing brands that aren't existing film brands into films?
will be very interesting. I think my conservative bet is that Barbie is one of those rare unicorn
Yeah,
subjects
yeah.
that good on them for delivering not just a softball, but something that was even more interesting.
Well, but then you look at Super Mario, right?
Another example, like a withheld bit of IP
Yeah,
that the
yeah,
Nintendo people have basically sat on. I mean, to me, like
right.
the day that I give away all my money to buy every possible thing associated with it is like when Legend of Zelda goes full
Oh,
movie and TV. Like
I mean, that's the
I
thing.
it's
There's so
over.
many. I think there's so
There's
many
well, there's I mean
IPs that
Disney.
haven't become films yet, right?
I mean Disney kicked that door open first when like for the longest time
Right,
their movies felt scarce and then you could only experience them in amusement parks and then they started making
right, right,
series and started making
right,
lots of
right.
additional sequels. So that the model's been there. I'm just curious, are there other things like does Play-Doh come out and like the Play-Doh movie?
You're just on this Republic thing, man. I mean, it's actually funny to me that Disney hasn't done more with like Brothers Grimm and all the old fairy tales. Like there's
You
so
mean
much
like
more.
public domain IP?
Yeah, there's so much, like Snow, from
They don't
Snow
own
White to
it,
Little Mermaid to
but they
whatever.
don't own
There's
it.
hmm. What does that mean though? Everybody owns
Well,
it.
Snow
So
White,
why
they
don't
own it.
they?
Well, I guess you can make even more money off of IP that like Little Mermaid is more
Right.
fully exploitable.
But I guess what I'm saying is that there's so much Little Mermaid. There's so much
I don't know. I
like
kind of think they've been doing.
legends and fairy tales.
I mean,
Instead they create new stuff.
when I saw Willow the
Elemental.
series, you know,
Oh,
that's Pixar though. Pixar is a bit more like they kind of run with their own like
true, true,
like
true.
they
They
are
do their own thing.
they
That's true.
ideate. Whereas the Disney proper, like they just keep milking the IP.
Well, I mean, I felt like for a period there, I was like Snow White, blah 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 blah, Little Mermaid, Bambi. I don't know, other stuff. It was like, oh, they're drawing from this old canon that they can draw from, right? So I'm surprised they didn't just continue doing that. Instead, they just keep remixing old stuff like Princess and the Pea and you know Little
Well,
Mermaid
well,
2.0.
so far we're not answering Fizzle or Explosive because we've gotten sucked
Wait,
in
yeah,
by the
sorry.
we've gotten
Yeah.
sucked in by the Barbie vortex, which
Well, we're
we
talking
don't.
about blockbusters. I think that's part of
Okay,
the topic.
but I think
But yeah,
Oppenheimer is I don't know. To me, it's so exciting to see a movie that cerebral even enter this
yes,
conversation. But one of my biggest like kind of worries of like the sort of the state of popular culture is that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of fandom around smarts. Like if like Einstein the movie came out, like I can't tell if anybody cares. But it's to think that Nolan has a fan base that comes with him. I mean, obviously, I kind of think he really blew that up with his forays into Batman, and I think that cemented
yeah,
his sort of fanboy
right.
status. But like,
His legacy. Yeah.
but I mean, to me, my dad's a physicist. He works at Los Alamos. I'm actually flying there tomorrow to make a bit of an annual visit to hang with parents. So I sort of have a personal relationship with the basic subject matter. I kind of grew up with it, and my parents like literally live there. But to me,
Right.
it's been such like a wow, this is like this fascinating chapter of history, but it always feels like it's really dense stuff. Do people really process? It's also really dark stuff. It's complicated. It's funny. My wife also went to see it last night, and even before she saw it, she was her news feed different than mine was flagging how you know and I don't think the movie is just sitting there to glorify Oppenheimer. I think it's a pretty nuanced portrait, but it does sort of elevate it to like, here's this like,
Right.
iconic chapter of American history. This guy that was often referred to in the film as, the most powerful or important man in history or something for what he contributed. But like what he did with Los Alamos, he literally just like, claimed a bunch of Native American land and, did as dark a repeat of that chapter of history as most people have gotten used to in US history. So, it's messy, it's complicated history.
I mean, New Mexico itself is kind of like, I went there a month and a half ago or 2 months ago, and it is a surreal place. It's like
Land of enchantment.
You got the nuclear element, you've got the reservations, you've got Meow Wolf, you've got like a long history of like tuberculosis, cancer, and etc. research. It's kind of it's a weird.
It's also like
it's
all like Santa Fe
casinos, right?
But Santa Fe as a city is 500 years old. It's older than America. That was a colonial capital of when this was a Spanish colony, Spanish territory. So New Mexico is fascinating. It's like a intersection of, like you say, like government lab culture. There's a lot of labs, tons of labs in New Mexico. A lot of
people with security clearance.
A lot of military, my dad being one of them. And like the sort of the Native American story, like there's a ton. I mean, they're pueblos, they're not reservations in New Mexico. And there's I mean, if you just do one of those maps where it shows you how much territory belongs to First Nations, Native Americans, like there's a lot of it, perhaps even the bulk if I was staring at it right now. But then there's also this like new agey kind of crowd, and not even just new agey, just culty. Like, I mean, one of my favorite things in Santa Fe is to go to to bring back Trader Joe's or even Whole Foods. If you go to the Whole Foods or the Trader Joe's in Santa Fe, just hang out and just watch the parade of weird, like all the different kind of like wealthy culty hippies from like neighboring communities. Like that's where they get their produce. and like you'll just see these like Sikhs walk by that are really just like kids from Connecticut that like ran away from their parents with their parents like trust funds. Like there's just all these amazing intersections of people that have come here to build something. And then on top of that, you have the sort of very like kind of turquoise emblazoned belts and cowboys, like the rich cowboys, like people from like Dallas or Aspen. This is where they have their ranches. So it's like this sort of like additional subculture of like kind of like wealthy cowboy folks.
Is that where Robert Oppenheimer is? Because he is to a certain extent displayed as this, horseback riding guy who's in love with this countryside, right? He's not even from there, but he's in love with.
I mean, it was early days when he was there, where it was one of these outposts where people who wanted that kind of like, John lifestyle. Wayne experience, like that's where they would go live it out. Yeah. I suspect, I don't know that much about his early life, but it seems to be that's what he identified with.
Well, I mean, I thought there was a kind of poetic moment to me in the film. And, this, by the way, this would be full of spoilers, folks, but, that he's like, I just wanted this intersection of my favorite place and physics. If only that could happen. And eventually that does come to pass, right? And he architects it, or at least it portrayed in the film is that he architects that all to happen, which is in the book, so I read the book and I love the book. And it was a very nice pairing with the film because I knew all these figures before the film. But there is a moment where Grove is like, Leslie Groves, the general, is like, I want to find a place that is discreet and like we can have security around it, and Oppenheimer suggests New Mexico, and so they kind of really align on that, and then eventually it is built in New Mexico. So it's kind of
curious. I wonder how much of that is just purely his whim and how much maybe there was already a profile. But I know, like, for example, like the space travel kind of crowd that like have also used New Mexico as like a home base. One of the things I thought was clever is that New Mexico is also uniquely very high altitude. There's a lot of, it's like mesas. So like a place, mesas. So even though like it doesn't look like the Rockies, when you drive through Santa Fe, like you're at like 6,000 to 8,000 feet altitude.
Right.
So it's all these like high mesas. So I remember like when I visited like the spaceport, which I forget which, that's not SpaceX. Is it Richard Branson, the spaceport kind of in?
Richard Branson is but
there's like
Galactic, right?
Right. But whichever company set it up. There's the spaceport in like kind of mid
Oh,
central,
that I don't know.
and it's really cool. Like it looks like a scene from Star Wars. It's like an incredible like piece of architecture. But I remember when we did the tour there, what's kind of clever is that because you're so high, like you're getting. I think the log line is you get the first miles on us. Like in
Right.
terms of like getting your jet to propel up, your rocket to move up into the atmosphere. Like you have like you have a
Right.
shorter
You're lifted. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you have a shorter amount of travel and less gas. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that
Yeah.
it seems to be a good lab for a couple other reasons. There's also a lot of explosion facilities. Again, I wonder how much of that is just the wake of Oppenheimer. But you have Sandia Labs, Los Alamos, New Mexico State University, or is it? I remember I went there to shoot like a sizzle for a TV show of like it was like Bomb University or something. It's like where the kids just like blow stuff up for college. Got to film some explosions, but it's a pretty interesting place. It's unusual, and it's weird. You just cross over the border into Arizona, and it's like a totally different culture. Like
Oh,
it's literally.
Spaceport America is owned by New Mexico,
But I
the
thought it
state of
was
New
like,
Mexico.
but I thought it was
Facility
like,
owned and operated. Tenants of Spaceport include Virgin Galactic,
I think that
as well as SpaceX and UP Aerospace. So I guess it's used by a bunch of folks.
It's a great place to visit if you go back. Like if you ever go back to New Mexico and you want to do like the science tour, there's that. Do you know about the Very Large Array?
No.
That's like you remember the movie Contact?
Yeah. Yeah.
All those space needle or all those
Yeah.
telescopes, like that's there. Like there's all these like amazing like sci-fi backdrops, but also like real science
Which I
facilities.
mean, I would probably credit. I mean, it had to be Oppenheimer that started that, right? I mean,
I'd be curious. I'd be curious. I'm gonna ask my dad when I go visit. But
Yeah.
but I mean, to go back to the movie, I mean, I think like last night I cracked open a box of DVDs recently and sort of have rediscovered the joy of inserting a DVD into a device to watch a movie, which is like there's something kind of like I guess that's what people.
Hey, you're like
associate
Nolan.
with
Nolan will
But-
love you for it.
But I have an old Blu-ray of Dr. Strangelove from my.
By the
like,
way,
little-
the reason why I mentioned that is because Nolan recently in an interview said that he doesn't like streaming because he can't control the quality. So he prefers people to watch
yeah.
his films, or he watches his films in Blu-ray DVD because he likes the quality. Anyway. And like the tactile experience of having a cover.
There's something about it. I kind of invite everybody to give it a try again. Like it's something like cool.
I mean,
like,
it's something that Gen X millennials say. Gen Z will
Right,
be like,
but
whatever,
I'm saying-
Nolan.
No, but I think it's the same
I
reason why
hear
all of a
you.
sudden
I
people
hear
like
you.
vinyl. Like it's the same experience.
Totally,
Like,
totally.
wow, but
I mean, I hear you, but
I watched Dr. Strangelove, which is like one of my top 10 favorite movies, and it was interesting just to like watch even the featurette of like the making of it. And so that movie in its time was obviously, I think it was made in 1963, if I'm getting my dates right, literally within a couple years of Bay of Pigs, Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest we've genuinely ever come to, the ultimate nightmare of, all the superpowers pointing weapons at each other. So, in the same way that some of us can relate to what it was like right after 9/11 or what COVID did to us, like here's this global experience of what everybody had to endure, like a real traumatizing societal experience. And in that climate, I guess Stanley Kubrick had just finished a couple movies. It's funny, I don't know how history handles the fact that he made that movie Lolita, but he had just made that, which kind of also built his relationship with Peter Sellers.
Right.
But
who is the man? I love Peter Sellers.
But he sort of on a personal level became obsessed with nuclear technology. Apparently he was reading dozens of books, just was also on a personal level very afraid of what was going on in the world. So he decided to make a movie. They optioned this book called Red Alert, which was basically about the topic that a general at an Air Force base goes rogue and sort of sets into motion a sequence of events that basically eventually triggers the doomsday scenario. But what's amazing is that it sounds like which was a very sober book that they optioned, but in the process of developing that into a screenplay, him and his producing partner David Harris, eventually a writer called Terry Southern, they sort of were just up late and just started like cracking up laughing as they were writing the screenplay, and at some point we're just revealing the absurdity of it all. Of just like there's something just manically insane about this whole like plot line. So they just started saying, what if we made this a comedy? And then at some point, like that was the writing process with Terry Southern, is that he would bring them out to England, they'd like lock themselves up in a writer's room, and he would just be like, the same way that like Kubrick's famous for like doing like 75 takes of any scene, like he would do that with the writing process, and he would just keep pushing the writer, like, what's the craziest thing this person would say right now? What's the craziest thing this person would say right now? And that's where like you get these quotes like Sterling Hayden, obsessing over bodily fluids, and that's what the Russians are doing to Americans, whatever. So anyway, just this idea that given the opportunity to tell a story about nuclear holocaust in that moment, it was the novelty from its era of like its version of Christopher Nolan, what Kubrick was even in that moment. He was that guy to the Hollywood crowd. That anything he did was like a big deal. Or he was certainly ascendant at that point. He decided to make a comedy. And I always like to think about how movies and TV are kind of like a mirror, or in some ways, at least an expression of what society is going through, because these are mass media. They're not just somebody's private poem. And it's just fascinating that was its version of therapy, to sort of say, hey, like, I don't know if we need to laugh at it, but the story of what's going on right now, like it's something to laugh at. And then I sort of fast forward to Oppenheimer, that is clearly not a comedy. It's also never going to be Christopher Nolan's muscle to flex. I'd be shocked to ever see him take on comedy.
Yeah, I don't think he doesn't do comedy.
But still, like, given the opportunity to tell the story, it's a hyper sober, like almost wake up call of a movie, which, I think we live in a very different world than in 1963. I think.
Well, I think
people barely take anything seriously today.
I mean, I would guess that this time does not feel absurd. Versus Dr. Strangelove's time, I would imagine like he might be taking a page out of the book of Albert Camus. And it's like, in a world of absurdity, just be free in a way. Whereas I don't feel that's the vibe today.
And we're saying the same thing, is that like, I think right now, if anything, people are so numb to like the news cycle that's constantly telling them that the sky is falling, and then it doesn't. And then like, what's next week's, chaos. And
right.
That it's interesting that like, okay,
it's darker. We live in a darker time.
If you captivate an audience, the opportunity in that room is like, no, you need to come away from this shook. If you're not shook, then he failed. So I don't know.
And people are reporting that they have nightmares from the film, so which is funny.
I mean,
I get it.
So I don't know. That was kind of my like shook processing, like that. I think it felt like, I hope then people don't just walk across the hall and just get excited about, I don't know. Barbie apparently
which
is a
is
very substantial movie too. But like, I just mean, I hope it stays with people. And I think what has been Nolan, I don't know if it was his intention when he made the movie, but it's clearly been his intention with it landing in this year, the way it's associated with AI as like, we're doing this again. I hope people, sort of get serious about what's happening in the world right now.
I wonder if people will make that connect. I mean, I do wonder, like, because for me, like coming from the book, it was like watching this film, I was like, oh my God, like it is an overwhelming cast of people that impacted Oppenheimer's life. And I wondered often while watching the film, like, I wonder how people are keeping up with this, because it's like, there's Teller, there's, there's, I don't know, Niels Bohr, there's Einstein, there's, Heisenberg, and he's running into all these people. And it's like, who are these people? Do people remember, people coming into the film, do they remember that Heisenberg was leading the atomic bomb project? And, so there's all these elements that, and it was like, who is this Strauss guy that's trying to take him down, and why? And there's a lot of elements to it. So I did wonder, especially because the first third of the film I felt was very frenetic, very schizophrenic, which I think for me, watching the film, it communicated really well how his life probably felt. Like it probably might have felt like this kind of like frenetic rise into like a new type of physics, which culminated in him directing this, like the most terrifying and most powerful thing that humans have created. And then to be this descent into like McCarthyism and guilt and sin and being crucified and martyred and all these emotions that were so complex for him to experience towards the end of his life. And then this like redemption, which was also very quick. It almost felt like the redemption was like 5 minutes, and it was like the film's over. So it was
His
a lot. It
redemption?
was
What do you mean? You mean that just like that he was getting awards and medals at the end?
yeah, basically, and actually not until 2022 actually does the U.S. government fully, recant or whatever, what have you, what they did to him. What that award was in the end, again, spoilers, is JFK intended to give him some kind of, I forget the name of the award, that but JFK died, right? And it was LBJ that ended up giving him the award, and Jackie was there, and Jackie Kennedy was expressed to him that, hey, my husband really wanted to give you this award before he died, but that award did not reinstate his security clearance. It did give him like $50,000, but that's it. So it didn't really clear his name, but it was an honorific that in like in terms of a symbol would have made people feel like, hey, the US government forgives you. So it's kind of interesting, these elements of his life. And of course, like omitted from the film is that his daughter, years later commits suicide. And his son ends up, becoming a carpenter, I believe, and is still in New Mexico to this day with his family and kind of lives a secret life. And of course, his brother ended up creating the Exploratorium, which is amazing, right?
Oh wait, the one in
But
San Francisco?
yeah, the one in San
That's
Francisco,
Frank Oppenheimer?
Frank Oppenheimer, who is actually featured in the film as well,
Right.
ended up, after his brother was destroyed. I think he was kind of destroyed along the way. They moved to Colorado, I believe, and started a farm for 15 years, and eventually moved to San Francisco and started the Exploratorium, which, by many people would argue is one of the greatest science museums, if not the greatest science museum in the world. So
I might be going there next week. I didn't.
yeah, so that's Frank's.
I didn't process that.
That's Frank. So there's a lot, I feel like, that's going on, and there's a lot of things that are in this film that are omitted, right? Like Teller, who is by the way, the only scientist who spoke out against Oppenheimer. All the other scientists were appalled and all spoke in favor of Oppenheimer. Teller, who's the Hungarian who was pro the super bomb and hydrogen bomb, he actually is one of the first scientists to mention climate change, to put forward the idea that we need to be, so there's a lot of elements to this that are kind of complex. Like Strauss himself is also very complex. So the film definitely paints people in the light of Oppenheimer, and I sympathize with that. But it's also like Strauss is this very complex person, who, maybe I am kind of on his side to a certain extent, or maybe I'm not. Like, am I pro hydrogen bomb or am I not? And in general, I feel like the film is complex in the sense that you are faced with a scenario where the Nazis and the Soviets might develop a bomb which would challenge American hegemony. So you're immediately in this game theory scenario, right? What do you do? And here's Oppenheimer, who to me represents how maybe we should all feel if we're really human about this whole situation. Like, of course, you do it if you had the ability, but then once doing it, how do you feel about it? The one thing I felt was missing.
It's not just how sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, one last thing is the one thing that I felt was missing from this film is that, and I do see a lot of complaints about, the Native Americans are not featured and the Japanese are featured. The one thing I felt was missing was that he did actually visit Japan, like after the bomb was dropped. And I felt like that would have brought something home.
That would have been an interesting final scene too.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was talking, you're way out of focus, your camera.
I don't know why.
But there you go. But the that would be its own kind of like interesting like film school paper to write, is sort of like the arc of his sort of like awakening. Right. That it seems like as early as the scene when he's talking to Albert Einstein, that would eventually gets revealed of what they talked about. It sounds like they knew then this is the end. Like this of
this world, right?
Yeah, like this is the sequence that we're in, it's already happening, which, as I sort of draw the parallels with the current moment of AI, like the fun doomsayers like Eliezer and others who are similarly using explosive language of like it's over, but there's nothing to slow down or stop. Like it's happening. The game theory sequence of events is in motion. So
Right.
it's interesting to think that they already knew that early. That, but then,
Which is what, like 3 to 5 years, I think, right?
but
Three,
in
5 years
some ways,
before.
I think as a Jew and as someone living in an era of Hitler, there was this sort of like absolutism that like, of course you go do this at all costs, by any means necessary. Like
Right.
Hitler must be
Right.
stopped.
Right.
And you
Right.
can sort of imagine that clarity of moral conviction, in context of building the weapon that will end the world, or could end the world, as like worth it, because that's how awful it was.
Right.
And
Right.
then there was that interesting turning point when, well, Hitler's done. That part of
Right.
the war's over. And then, like,
Right.
somebody's like, well, the Japan stuff's pretty intense. Like, there's a lot going on over there. Like
Right.
that part of the war's
Let's
not
continue.
over.
Right.
So in some ways, the one boogeyman is replaced by another to somehow justify this by any means
Right.
necessary, kind of, something that in some zoom out is mental. Like, why would you ever create something that even has anything more than zero potential
Right.
to sort of catastrophically end human life? Like, why is that a topic of discussion? But it's because these things were so intense to live through, and these things that were having so many impacts on other parts of life. But then, like, okay, so then there's that scene when arguably is that the beginning of his turn, when he's presenting to that group of people that are so euphoric and so
Right.
happy.
Right.
And and it's
And
like
the gravity post drop, right?
and
Hits
and
him.
and it's an interesting moment that it kind of reminds me. Did you ever see a movie called Act of Killing?
No, no.
So Act of Killing is required viewing. It just, for anybody who's ever loved documentaries, it was nominated for an Oscar. It's about this sort of like these sort of warlord kind of former generals from Indonesia who are all still alive.
Oh,
And arguably, like, I guess the parallel is like, imagine if the Nazis were still here, and imagine if not only are they still here, but they go on talk shows and they talk about the good old days when we used to exterminate
yep.
the Jews. Like, that's, I guess, the context of that film. And the filmmaker, ironically, Joshua Oppenheimer, as I'm telling you the story, that the
Oh my God.
filmmaker, I doubt there's any real connection, but he builds a relationship with these warlords to say, okay, fine, well, nobody knows what you did. We should tell the story. We should sort of document this for history before you die. So he ends up filming with a number of these guys, and this is where it gets really surreal. He works with them to film the recreations of what they did.
Oh,
And it's so mental. Like, it's so like, it blows your mind, because it's not just like I'm doing recreations, like they're in it. They're in the recreations. Like, they're acting in their own stories. And then other members of like the Indonesian
right.
like public are brought in as extras. And some of them had parents that were killed by these warlords,
Right.
however many decades ago, when all this really happened. And then the even more surreal part is the backstory on all these warlords is that before their conflict with the Chinese, it's just, I guess that's the parallel of the genocide piece, was that they were all really into movies. So like, before they were warlords, they were just like these like thug gangster guys that loved hanging out at the movies. So when
Oh
they
my
do
God, that's
when
hilarious.
they do recreations, they do it as like mobsters. They do it as like country western, kind of like John Wayne characters. One of them even does it as like a crazy Hollywood musical. Again, this is like the acid trip of movies that you'll ever see. But I bring this up because one of the main characters, like one of the main warlord guys, his arc is arguably what we're talking about
Similar
with
to Oppenheimer's
Oppenheimer,
arc.
because he goes from being like, man, I'm like this like celebrity, nobody knows who I am, and all these like kids don't know how good it was what we did. And then you see him go through these scenes where he's like not just participating in recreations, he's directing them. Like, he's giving notes, like he's watching the footage, and you're watching this like, no, when we wrapped the piano wire around their heads to cut their heads off, it wasn't quite like that. Like, it's
Yeah.
those types of
Yeah.
notes. Like, it's really dark and intense stuff.
Right. Right.
And you watch him go on this arc that he eventually realizes.
Like what? The sin.
He like, you see Hitler discover he's Hitler.
Right. Right.
It's incredible. Like, it's honestly, it's the most amazing moment in a movie I've ever seen. Like, it's like you're watching the raw moment when somebody discovers they're Satan.
Right.
And I don't want to ruin it too much because you should see it, but it's that moment when it happens, like it's and so to me that moment when in the scripted film when Oppenheimer's in front of that crowd
Yeah.
and you just see it's a
He steps
it's
in that body, right? Remember that?
it's like it's nausea, like
Yeah.
it's repulsion,
Right.
it's sort of like pure shock of what have
Right.
I done.
Right.
And it's amazing to go like to think about how he sits in this, you know, canon of people in history that were in the fog of war, that were in the
Yeah.
fog of geopolitics, that somehow justified these by any means necessary things, that we went so far as to, you know, now we live with these objective facts that these things are part of the chess game of life.
Right.
That like, well, if you
Right.
do this to me, I got these things that are going to obliterate humanity. What do you think about that? Like, that's insane. But like, you know, that I thought was one of the moments that I up until that point in the movie, I felt like, all right, this is just like a really well done movie. It's just a good friggin' movie. It's looks beautiful, the acting's incredible, the content is super important. I'm gonna guess there's a big bang at the end of this thing. Like I'm down, like I'm into this. And but it just felt like a movie. To me, that was the moment that I think he truly used the art of cinema to try to explain something to all of us of like, well, what is that what is that human condition that none of us could ever imagine being inside that guy's life, of being
Yeah. I
so
mean,
brilliant, so capable to deliver something that the
right.
world should have never wanted, you know.
Right. Well, I mean, it's interesting because these sequence of events that are covered in the film. It's like I forget I forget the name of the scientist, but this one scientist writes a letter, gets Einstein to sign it, sends it to FDR. Right. That really is the beginning of the chain of events. Is that these scientists think that, hey, we need to build an atom bomb because the Nazis might do it, and it's like, okay, and then you set up the series of events that leads to Oppenheimer doing it, and then blah blah, and now we're dropping a bomb on Japan, and if you go backwards far enough, it's like, oh, is it because of, you know, Pearl Harbor, and is it because of Hitler, and all, you know, but then you look forward, and it's like, if we had not dropped the bomb, like, what does that world look like? What kind of America would we have? What kind of Japan would we have? It's kind of an eerie
I mean,
thought experiment, right?
it's all part of this broader, like, you know, like what is this escalation? How is this progress? You know,
Right.
like how is this what like the elevated status of humans in the 20th century, now 21st century? This is what we do with our capabilities. But yeah, you're right. Like the alternative that is even harder to process is the what if we hadn't dropped the bomb? How many more
Right.
people would be dead? You know, would Japan have won the war? Would the Axis, in spite of Hitler, you know, going away, have risen up and created a generation of people
Right.
that
Uh,
wishes the war had gone the other way, you know?
or maybe, you know, would we have had more nuclear power instead of drop bombs and making nuclear plants? Because it's funny, it's something I forgot to mention was that Lewis Strauss, although he was very, you know, him and Oppenheimer locked, you know, antlers or whatever. What's the expression? I forgot, but he was a big
Horns, locked horns.
locked horns. They, you know, he was a big proponent of using nuclear power for power, you know. So it's all kind of interesting looking at that history and like imagining what the chain of events would have been. But you know, shifting gears a little bit, given how powerful this film is, but also taking into account, at least my take is that it's a bit hard to understand but easy to feel in this film. Do you think it's an Oscar winner? I mean, Nolan has never gotten an Oscar, by the way. He's been nominated, but he's got Golden Globes. I just checked. He's never won an Oscar, which is surprising to me given Dark Knight and all that.
Yeah, but
Um,
those movies were always got like the Lord of the Rings treatment, that it was sort of
right,
like somehow
right.
like the Hollywood, you know, Crystal Palace sort of thought, well, those are the movies for the people. We're making the movies for
Well,
the
here's a
pantheon.
film that to me is like almost like a to me is like a Schindler's List level film where,
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, I'm
it
sure
has that strength, that significance. It has the depth. It has
I,
a central character that is an actor who's amazing, right? Um, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it's its own culture war. Like, let's say how the Oscars happen today.
Yeah,
presumably there's like the Barbie camp and the Oppenheimer camp. And there's the sort of
I mean, I don't know.
a crowd
You
that's
think
fighting
Barbie's
for.
a Oscar? I mean, you didn't watch it yet, right?
I didn't see it, but I'm hearing people sort of really respect the craft too. Like it isn't just commercial.
It's a really fun film, but I don't know if it's an Oscar winner. It's just a really fun film.
Well,
Yeah.
that speculation aside, I mean, I gotta
Yeah.
believe, that there's it's not just Oscar buzz. I mean, what other movie this year could possibly compete with that right now?
What do you
So
mean? Tom Cruise Mission Impossible 7, sir? I don't know. I don't know that there is,
let's see.
you know.
2023 Oscar buzz. What do we got?
Spider-Verse. Spider-Verse is great, I have to say. I think I would imagine that's it.
Oh,
For you
Killers
to-
of the Flower Moon, the Scorsese movie. Will definitely
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
that's probably the square off. Scorsese versus
Scorsese
Nolan.
versus Nolan. Well, I hope Nolan gets it because he deserves it, and Scorsese's gotten a lot.
Hang on, I'm looking.
Oh, but that's coming out. That's coming out later this year, so that's
Yeah,
still in question.
that's
still in
on
question.
schedule for the usual Oscar
And
buzz.
hey, and you got a big all-star cast: Leo, Brendan
Yeah,
Fraser, and Robert De Niro.
Here we go. As of hang on, this is as of July 21st, 3 days ago.
Yeah.
Variety.com, the paper of record for Hollywood. The best picture predictions so far are the Color Purple was coming out. I didn't know that was getting remade. Where's the list? Oh yeah, here's the predicted nominees: Killers of the Flower Moon, Oppenheimer.
Okay.
Maestro, I guess, is a Netflix movie. Oh, that's the Leonard Bernstein film that Bradley Cooper directed. I'd be shocked if that makes the waves. Past Lives. Oh, that's like a cool A24. That looks pretty good. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I can't believe that Oppenheimer doesn't win over that, even though it's a great movie.
Yeah.
The Ben Affleck, Michael Jordan movie.
No way. Did you
and
see that, by the way? Did
No,
you see
but I don't need to see it.
I saw it.
I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's fine. I don't care.
For me, forgettable.
Yeah, I'd rather watch.
I love Ben Affleck.
I'd rather watch Last Dance for the third time.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Last Dance is much better.
Jason Hare directed.
See, I mean, I hope this is Nolan's chance finally, because he's one of the great directors, and it's funny because Tarantino has got an Oscar. So
the amazing thing is, so if screenplay, right? I personally think Oppenheimer is entering Kubrick territory for Nolan's career arc.
Yeah.
That when he makes a movie, it's a moment. Like that it doesn't happen often. And Scorsese,
here he's elevating. He's elevating beyond just like sequel and brand. Here's a film that is not. Barbie comes with a lot of advantages and a marketing budget and a huge star cast. I mean,
the only marketing for
big.
Oppenheimer is Nolan. Nolan is the marketing.
Yeah, Nolan is the marketing. Yeah, so I think
which is
that alone is right.
But which is exciting to think that directors are, that's what Tarantino built up for himself.
Yeah.
Scorsese. So I think Scorsese was the last director I can remember that like all cinephiles were like, there was the injustice of the universe.
I don't blame them. Scorsese is legendary.
But he won for Departed. So then that's
which, by the way, is a film that he basically stole from Hong Kong. But
artists borrow and steal.
Yeah.
But Kubrick never won an Oscar. And that's fair. And that's the great like kind of cinematic injustice.
Right.
Let's see. I think there's
but Tarantino did, right?
See, the famously elusive Kubrick was nominated 4 times for Best Director, losing to the likes. Here's who he lost to. He lost to Carol Reed for the movie Oliver.
Don't even know what that is.
He lost to Billy Friedkin for The French Connection.
That's not a bad film.
It's not a bad film, but I think like it's hard to imagine. Oh wait,
what film lost to that film?
Hang on, let's see. I have this like Merlin plug-in on my Chrome extension. Stanley Kubrick. He was often snubbed despite a second. Kubrick such as Space Odyssey, Clockwork Orange, and The Shining are considered masterpieces, yet they were largely overlooked by the Academy.
So
Right.
so because the Academy is basically people in Hollywood, right? So they're voting. So at the time they didn't feel like 2001. I mean, sci-fi in general, I feel like it's hard for sci-fi to pierce through the noise to get an Oscar, but this is why I think. I mean, I think Oppenheimer could make it because one, I think it's an important film in terms of the topic matter, right? And the moment AI, which I'm sure is top of mind for the Academy and people in the Academy.
All right.
And
So
then of
here's
course it's a great film in and of itself, right?
so
It's
Doctor
holds up.
Strangelove, he was nominated for Best Director, but he lost to George Cukor for the much less cynical My Fair Lady. So that's his snub number one.
Okay, he lost to My Fair Lady. I mean, My Fair Lady is that's a big film.
Okay. So
That's a
then
big film.
and then 2001 Space Odyssey.
Lost
Uh
to
th-
French
th-
Connection.
he lost to Carol Reed took award though directing for Oliver.
Wow.
Um and
But
which one?
again, I think that's sci-fi, which I think is hard. It's tough for sci-fi to, you know, I could see why, I guess.
I'm trying to think what movie won instead. So a musical won that year. Then Clockwork Orange, which is a really
Wow.
dark movie, like
It's a
that.
dark
That's at
movie.
least
That's
so
all,
that
which
lost
also
that lost to The French Connection. Barry Lyndon,
okay.
which isn't
Okay.
people's favorite movie, but that was nominated. He lost to Milos Forman, who won for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Hmm.
Full Metal Jacket, he lost um, to. It's not clear, but there's one that it's like the ultimate injustice. I'm trying to remember: Killer's Kiss, Lolita, Eyes Wide Shut, Fear and Desire.
Well, anyway, I mean, not to bore the audience a little bit, but we're just gonna do
Sorry,
other things.
I've just gone down
But
the. Sorry, we went
no,
down
no,
the
you're fine. You're fine.
critical. But it's just like I think this might be.
I take your point though. You know, he might be one of those ones who is almost slightly too obscure for like mainstream Academy Hollywood to be like, yeah, we'll give him our vote. But I hope that he does. I hope that he gets his accolades. You know, I think he's a really great
I
director.
mean,
And
I mean,
I think Dark is it Dark Knight? Is that the one with Heath Ledger
that
is
was the
Dark
one
Knight?
that people that I think is the biggest injustice. Like
Yeah,
that's the
that's a
greatest
great
comic book
film.
movie ever made.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard for anybody to eclipse that. Um, but yeah,
But
anyway,
so I guess
yeah,
that's my takeaway from Oppenheimer is I can't help but think of it in context of sort of what is a movie about the unthinkable mean to an audience in its context, which is why it was interesting to go back to Strangelove. And I think, we're living in a time where as much as you'd like to think that's a movie for the past, like it couldn't be more relevant that
right.
there's someone with their finger on a button that literally could annihilate major parts of Europe and trigger a sequence that at least embroils people into another world war
Right.
or
Right.
triggers that sort of like this bomb hits that, then that bomb hits that. Like it really could happen. It's as the
Yeah, it's
doomsday clock.
still real, right? It's still,
The
I
doomsday
mean,
clock is very close to
North
midnight,
Korea's still shooting ICBMs, you know, every few weeks, right?
So whether we're numb to that reality and we're no longer as scared as we were in the 50s and the 60s, but that I think should be some type of reminder of the world we actually live in, not just like the fun Fortnite, games that we play.
Well, it's
But
funny you
also,
mentioned that.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, and then also like, you can't ignore the parallels with there's these new kind of Pandora's boxes of technology that are
Right, with
that are
AI.
that seem wonderful at first blush, and they create a race for who gets to develop it first. But we haven't fully processed what's the worst possible thing somebody can do with this stuff. And I think that's Nolan's kind of cautionary tale narrative that he's saying publicly, and that's his interview bite right now.
Well, it's funny because I wonder two things. One is that is current Oppenheimer, shooting to 75 or 150 million globally or whatever the number is that because of Barbenheimer and Nolan, and will that survive, right, the next few weeks? And secondly, and hence the Fizzle. I still wonder about that. And I think another argument for the Fizzle is that like this is a dark film and people might not want, like, so, I don't know, the vibe that I get from people these days, especially on social media, is like I don't want to think about the dark stuff. I want to go happy, and I think Barbie is happy, and so people want something happy and cheery. I, it's funny to me that definitely on Twitter, seeing a lot of, especially like tech people, kind of crapping on Oppenheimer because it's not, you know, this optimistic thing that will bring in more people into technology. I wonder if people don't want that in film anymore. You know what I mean? Like, do people want to be entertained, and so they want to go to the movie theater and they want to feel good. They want to leave feeling good. Oppenheimer does not make you feel good when you leave the movie theater, and if in fact it might make you feel worse and make you feel dread about humanity, which I think is what films should do, in my opinion.
I mean, look,
But I wonder if that will impact its sales.
I mean,
Is
the
what I'm
ancient
asking,
Greek,
right?
sort of theater logo is the smiling
Right,
mask, sad mask. Like
right, right,
you couldn't have a better representation of the tragedy and the comedy
right,
of life
right,
in this weekend. And I think
right.
so I would say if there's some type of like history to this question, it's like I think people still watch Last of Us on HBO, and there's nothing comedic about that show.
Yeah,
There's
that's fair.
nothing happy about. There's certainly no shortage of dystopian futures.
But at least with Last of Us, it's somebody else. It doesn't exist. It's not real.
No,
So
it's
there's kind of a
dystopian
separate.
future.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's some idea that like, well, it hasn't really happened, and this is a
Right.
bummer because it has happened. But
Right.
I don't
Right.
know. Like people watch like 1917 and Dunkirk, like the war movies
Sure.
always have a now whether or not it's like the sort of pop culture blockbuster smash 4 weeks from now that like clearly Top Gun was this time last year.
Right.
Clearly Avatar, became that type of business, always was. I almost think it's ridiculous to ask the question, but it's like at some
Oh,
point, this is the business of Hollywood. But like,
totally. I
but
mean,
yeah,
Oppenheimer is transcendent on its own, but just for the sake of asking, what does blockbuster mean, and how will this survive? Because I do think Barbie is gonna continue to go to rise. It's a really good film in my opinion, and it's a subject matter that appeals to a massive population, right, globally.
I mean,
Um,
it definitely is its own meta that the both movies seem to kind of benefit one another,
right.
in terms of like the free marketing for Hollywood. But as I just scan, the headlines, Barbie takes the box office crown
Of
as
course. I mean,
and
that was expected. That was expected.
Oppenheimer
Right.
soars in a historic weekend. So it's like
Right.
good vibes.
Right.
Everybody likes each other. Like the Drudge Report headline is Barbie saved summer, and
Right.
he's
Right.
usually pretty good about just picking like
Right.
the pithy, here's what you really need to know. So look, the
Well,
story is clearly being written. Kudos to everybody involved in that movie. I hope this is true for an industry that we've talked a lot about that needs a lifeline of what can we do else? What else can we do besides, swim against this sort of broken stream? If it's
right.
true that this creates a new opening, I'm talking about
Awesome.
Barbie, like for that, like
Right.
brands and the usual support between commercials and content now have an even
Right.
more direct to consumer model that can be blasted out. Somebody told me that
Right.
I think Mattel has like 50 other projects now in
Oh,
motion.
dude.
So
I mean,
so I hope for all the people that need jobs and need to find a new way to look at what we're doing, it'd be amazing.
right.
I again, my sense is, set your sights on what the B plus version of that success is, because Barbie is a juggernaut as a brand.
Right.
But
Right.
so that's good news. That's great news. And it's just ironic amidst the strikes and everything that's happening that this is the breath of air that Hollywood's been desperate for a few years
Right.
now. And now like they're like, well, don't count on that happening next summer, like
Right. And I think that's kind of interesting, right? That that was the next topic I was going to bring up before we kind of wind down. But yeah, like what's happening next summer? Are the films coming out next summer? Maybe not, right?
I mean, not once you put a pause button on the conveyor belt,
Yeah. It's kind of scary. So we got this big bump and then a strike, and then a wasteland akin to New Mexico, Mesas. So just to kind of wind us out, because I know we both have to go. What anything you're looking forward to this week, Fred?
I mean, I'm kind of on a personal level excited to kind of have the gift of going to the land of Oppenheimer after. I think I'm gonna have a newfound
Oh, you're
appreciation.
gonna
And I mean, my dad always told me when we go to Santa Fe, the downtown historic area, it's really cool how like the Haagen-Dazs ice
Yeah.
cream store apparently is like known as like the physical building before it got turned into an ice cream shop. That's where the
Oh,
spies
it's
used
like
to meet.
where they. Oh,
That's where the spies used to meet.
oh, that's
That's
funny.
that's where like the
The ones
secret
that were
exchange.
watching Oppenheimer.
So there's
Um,
just like it's cool to reconnect with that. So I'm looking forward to that. What about you?
I'm looking forward to seeing how X.com lands and whether or not Threads is going to finally release web. Um, any big news items you're following?
I mean, I was just starting to look at like it's interesting to think about the open AI kind of plateau. Is it the Friendster of the social media era, or is it the
Right.
the Facebook is an interesting kind of thought experiment of like is it Netflix or is it Friendster? Like is it the first is it the first mover that then owned the market, or is it the first mover that gets swallowed up by more powerful players? So that to me is an interesting meme this week. That I'm just
Yeah.
seeing a lot of people sort of like openly criticizing. Forget even the signups, just the idea that it's kind of not doing so good, just as like tech, like it's not,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's flailing a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah. That is interesting. I wonder how that's going to go. I'm also curious about Mattel's stock price.
Hmm. Yeah.
Will it take a bump from this today? Um, lastly, a fun fact that I learned. I don't know if these are fun endings, but fun fact might be a bit random. But fun fact I learned that was omitted from the Oppenheimer film was this guy. I think his name is Tom Hall or Ted Hall or something. He's the traitor, which is not featured in the film. There is a guy who was sympathetic to the Soviets, and he literally wrote out a whole report. He worked in New Mexico or something like that, and he just compiled everything that they were working on and just walked into the Soviet embassy and handed them everything.
Hmm. Wow.
And that's how the Soviets knew. And of course, the FBI was chasing all these other people, Oppenheimer, et cetera. And turns out just some random dude is found to be, apparently, according to the Wikipedia page, was the only person who was found to spy on the Manhattan Project for the Soviets. And he did it of his own accord. He did not get recruited by the
Was that
Soviets.
the guy? That's not that guy
It's
wasn't in the
not featured in
movie?
the film, as far as I understand. Yeah,
Because there's that one guy they flagged, but it
I
was going by
it's
too fast.
it's a weird thing for me to read about, and like I would love even just like a small film made about this dude or a documentary, because being a trader is kind of boggles my mind a little bit. Especially it's
Yeah.
something so intense. Like you are giving them the ability to bomb us. Like what's going through your mind? Like anyway, that was my fun fact. Um,
Well,
anything for
good
you?
chatting.
Any fun fact for you though? Before you go,
Fun fact in general.
yeah. Any fun fact that you
Um,
learned recently?
well, I'm just looking at the headlines. I think it's fun that there's a UFO whistleblower that's going before the House panel.
Oh my
That
God,
that's
UFOs again.
that's always a winner. Can't not love the
Cut off our-
inevitable aliens that are going to take over our
Uh,
planet.
I watched a little bit of Asteroid City. It's,
Oh, is that good?
no, I haven't seen all of it. I'll just finish it today.
Sad fact, I think I might be almost done playing the new Legend of Zelda. I'm starting to
I'm
run out
sorry.
of. I think
Sorry.
they're starting to. I think I've hit all the
Losing steam on that one.
milestones. No, I just think it
Sorry.
might be over. I might have done all the
Oh,
fun
you might have
things.
done anything. Oh, okay.
It's been it's. I've lost a
Well,
lot of sleep over this game.
at least you get to drive a
Happily.
car for a minute in that game. I saw my friend driving a car.
Oh yeah, there's so many. You can fly spaceships. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do in that game.
Pretty cool. Well, there's always GTA 5.
Yeah. Well, I'll see you from New Mexico later this week.
Cool. Sounds
Hour
good,
time
man.
difference as we schedule together.